I'm really, really glad to be able to fit a DeLake's interview into this summer season of Back to the City. Welcome, Drew and Elizabeth from DeLake's.
Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
You're very welcome. If there is one record which kind of shouts summer more than any other, I think Unforgettable Cheer by DeLake's. DeLake's, of course, is a 7-piece Minneapolis indie glam pop band. And I witnessed your first show, actually.
Yes.
I witnessed your first show at MotoE some time ago. So
I'm glad you say Moto E. That's what I always try to tell people what it is, and they disagree with me sometimes. Good. Glad we're on the same page here.
Yeah, very much on the same page. So there's a really distinct sound and a really clear, intentional ethos, I think, to DeLake's. Could you share a little bit about how the group came together and how we arrived at this nice, coherent, summery, bombastic was the other word that you used?
Yeah, there's a lot going on with it. I guess I had on and off been playing in different bands since middle school and high school, and it's something that brings some of the most joy to me in my life is just being able to perform with other people. And there's a while after college where I just wasn't really writing any songs specifically for bands, but I was composing stuff for Heart of the Beast. I was doing some outdoor performance art pieces with some different people, some different collectives, and so I wasn't really writing any band, any like indie or rock type songs or anything cohesive like that for a while. And I think, after a while of just kind of accumulating a lot of ideas and having just some very fun, positive things happen in my life, I was like, you know what, I need to kind of gather all this stuff together, and I need to make a band. And it was also fortunate because two of my closest friends, Elizabeth being one, and my one of my childhood friends, Ben Ehrlich, who plays drums in DeLake's, both moved back to Minneapolis, and through that I was able to meet a lot of new people, including Patrick Adkins, who does synthesizers for us and all sorts of various keys, and then Graydon Peterson, who's an amazing bass player. And the three of them, they're more jazz guys, and so it's kind of fun to give them the rock side of things, spice up their world a little bit. But I guess the start of DeLake's was just kind of more of a reunion of a lot of people who I really care about, and I think that's kind of also a general theme of the album, is just reuniting and just positive gatherings. And so that's kind of the start of it, was just reunification.
Reunification, yeah, that's such an apt word, I think. Infinity.
Yeah.
The song Infinity, which is the penultimate song on the record.
Yeah.
It really is a sense of reunification. I mean, the final line is, "Now we're free from hegemony's grey estate, renewed and crowned via our lustrate." Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Although there is the same sense of good cheer in that song as there is throughout the record, I feel there it's the most philosophical. So there is a clear ethos and philosophy to the band, but it's an ethos and philosophy within which friendship and all the forms of love and connection, allowing music to take us places that words can't quite take us. There's a couple of moments in the record where that comes through. One is in the title track, Unforgettable Cheer. I'd write a book for you and every word would sound like this. And then there's a musical, a fun musical sound. Yeah. They'd all be unheard. They'd just be for you. Secrets for two. Anything to prove our love is true. So could you reflect a little bit more on this philosophy of DeLake's, maybe through the lens of Unforgettable Cheer and or Infinity, how unification and music relate, perhaps? How music is a medium for unification?
You said that perfectly. Music is 100% a medium for unification. Even just like we were saying earlier, just the the ability for us to come together and all perform was essentially the reason why Dill Lake started, was that we had the possibility of creating some really fun stuff together. And I think in terms of both of those songs, Unforgettable Cheer, which is our, for anyone who has not heard it yet, is our like nearly 10-minute song of, it's like, how many verses? It's like 16 verses right in a row. So it's quite a bit of just layering and blending different elements together. I think in terms of unification and like, I guess when I'm thinking about writing music and especially writing the topics of these songs, a lot of thoughts were just aimlessly bouncing around in my head, and it was a lot of just like grab this, try to place these all out in the waking world and try to actually compose something out of them. And Unforgettable Cheer is kind of a good example of that, because I think there's, in the recording we have like, oh my gosh, there's like well over 120 tracks on it. So it's just like, where does this come into play? Having all these interact, and it's supposed to sort of be like almost an endless conversation between both the characters in the story as well as the actual musical instruments, I think, as well. Yeah.
Well, I think that idea of layering is really important, and just within the title of kind of Unforgettable Cheer, because there's so much nostalgia built into the album. And I think that nostalgia in its most kind of traditional meaning, right? So both kind of joy and melancholy. And I think when we create memories, when we come together and remember the past, when we, just think about events in the past, or, when we kind of project into the future, we add elements, whether they're kind of true or false, right? So we layer in so much more kind of beauty and nostalgia in itself. And I think that song, as being kind of the title track, I think kind of informs that feeling that kind of encapsulates the whole piece as a whole.
Yeah. I love how you referred to how very many layers there are in terms of musical production there.
Yeah.
But then Elizabeth highlighting just said the different layers of memory and how in the nostalgia, there are aspects, and they come through in some songs more than others. There's maybe, I think, perhaps 4 or 5 songs which do explore this less sunny side. They do allow themselves to explore this less sunny side of the nostalgia. So could we expand a little bit more on the significance of that? Often it's in relation to memory. You highlighted memory. So the tricks that kind of our memories can play, and the way in which this music acknowledges that, as opposed to having a solely sunny celebration of the cheer.
Well, I mean, I think I teach a few students music lessons, and a lot of times some of them will come up to me and be like, hey, I'm trying to write a song. I'm trying to come up with a song. And so I'll try to give them some tips and tricks about things. But one thing that I always tell them is like, well, hey, if you want your chorus to really like stand out, pop out, you should kind of reflect the opposite a little bit. Have the verse or the pre-chorus be like much calmer, quieter, so you can really feel that impact. And I think that's exactly related to the emotional side of the album as well, is that, you can have this be an entirely summery, positive experience, but aside from that not always being the reality of a situation, it's also not going to do anything but flatline excitement, which I think is maybe a little more harmful than good for the delivery of the album, because if the entire thing was the same emotion the entire way through, which, to be fair, a majority of it is very upbeat and very bright and summery and positive. Having those just like moments of like kind of just bringing the listener back into more of a reality place. A place of reality. I think once they're shot back into more of the heightened state of some of the songs, it serves the impact a little better.
Well, I'm interested, I think it's really cool that is audible to the ear, because it was certainly a part of the recording process. We were kind of planning on recording this album, and then of course the pandemic hit. So there's a certain degree of kind of physically having to kind of reach back and hear things when you're not constantly rehearsing, when you're not really even in the same room together or talking about what kind of what you want to hear on something. So having to, how can I use my memory to go back to a moment when the music made sense and kind of bring that to the recording that I'm creating in the moment. So there's a very sense of kind of physical nostalgia that I think adds a little bit of depth to those cloudier or more nebulous moments that are, as you're saying, kind of that unsunnier side.
Yeah.
I feel that these that such moments help to, in an interesting way, kind of shed light on the significance of celebrating that which is wholeheartedly celebrated. And so a moment where that comes through is in another kind of philosophical song, "Luck in Non-Autonomy." And there we're asking the question we get very reflective at one moment, and we're asking, why do we find ways to feel so guilty of our instincts when we all know the appeal? It's something truly distinct. So it's this kind of philosophical moment, but obviously in the delivery with the two of you, the way the two vocals are kind of playfully interacting there. Yes, it's a real serious philosophical question, like, why do we shame ourselves? Why do we end up feeling guilty for these natural instincts that we have when everyone can relate? What's the significance of kind of taking that serious question where we're confronting things like the pervasiveness of feelings of shame and guilt, but then giving them this treatment?
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the best question. Why does it matter? We all feel it, you know? like, it's not doing any harm. It's literally, you know, positive expressions of emotions and stuff like that. But there's still kind of this, like, you know, societal taboo in certain cases. And, you know, it's not like anything specific, but like, I mean, it's such a good question. I mean, I think that's kind of, it sounds,
I mean, one of the things that Drew has always talked about is wanting to create these almost dance-like moments. And so I think that there's a celebratoriness to what you're saying, but also kind of almost like almost kind of a therapeutic moment when you can literally, your body's kind of compelled to move at the same time that these significant questions are being asked. So it's almost as if you're kind of literally working through kind of the answer to that question.
That's the answer to the question, actually, right there. That's good.
That's perfect. So rather than escapism, there's liberation, because we're not like pretending that that the status quo, which is, you know, referred to a few times. I already quoted the Hegemony's Grey Estate. There's a few references to the grayness and to this status quo within, which doesn't facilitate and encourage and celebrate self-acceptance and flourishing, really. The music itself, it's significant that it's drawing attention to that status quo at the same time as it is using rhythm and all kinds of other musical attributes to point away beyond that kind of stifling.
Well, and I think you're both right. Is that like that? I think a lot of it is just what's a good way to work through difficult questions and difficult experiences. And I think allowing yourself to celebrate who you are, allowing yourself to celebrate like the accomplishments of working through said difficult things. I mean, that what a better way to do that than through music, and that ties back to our conversation from earlier.
As if lightness could be the way. Like, I think we place so much pressure on ourselves to kind of really get down and muddy with the things that we struggle with, and perhaps lightness, breathing, airiness is another way to get us to where we want to be.
Exactly.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think that's the deal, is that there's not one way to do it. Like, hopefully awakening other options for people is a good thing, you know?
And we have the lived experience of coming together through music and community and the awareness of joy, unforgettable cheer, coming from that.
Yeah.
It would be artificial to exclude that awareness from consideration of, well, how do we grapple with, how do we get beyond these kind of the self-recrimination and blaming and shaming that obviously we're also aware is a problem. I think it's powerful how this music invites paying attention to that, paying attention to the experience of unifying through music, recognizing these are not separate issues. These are relatable issues.
Well, yeah, and I think that there's like, it's okay to allow yourself to have fun and enjoy yourself despite all the violence that exists in the world. I think is something that it took me a very long time to figure that out. Because I mean, again, it's just like when there are so many issues that stem from some very like root evils in the world, it's very hard to like, but you know what I'm gonna do? Have some fun, Well, you know what, like if you exhaust yourself to the point of not being able to actually make an impact in some way, whether it's like a minute impact on yourself or even just one other person, well, what good is that if you're just worn out, you're too worn out to do that? I kind of like seeing the album as being a respite from all that, as like a recharging station, as like, look, like, yeah, it is really weird out there. There's a lot of damage being done, but like it's okay to stop, heal, and celebrate the things that are good in life, because there are plenty of them.
There is a recognition and a harnessing of the radical component of joy, I feel.
Yeah.
To experience joy and to be reflective enough about what's happening there, that one doesn't lose oneself to the joy and lose sight of how this joy relates to other things.
Having memories of joy implies the opposite, right? It implies that there were moments without joy.
Yeah.
So I think that's where there's a little bit of kind of depth achieved.
Yeah.
One other moment in the song Unforgettable Cheer where there is a powerful clarification of exactly what the ethos of the record is this one. I never try to be so down on me. I never try to feel anything less than glee. So that's the starting point.
Yeah.
Yes, we're celebrating glee. We're seeking and paying attention to that, allowing that to grow. But there's a but nothing beats the serenity of when the feeling comes back to me. So that's a crucial moment too. So we're not losing ourselves and becoming isolated. Someone might have concerns about hedonism, about someone just becoming selfishly hedonistic.
Yeah.
How does this moment provide a rebuttal to that concern? What do we really enjoy the most?
Right. Well, gosh, that's a good one. I think that, at least in terms of the song, I'd say probably the most confessional of the entire album. It's very like diary entry sounding, which is essentially what it was, because I think it doesn't happen all the time, but I'm always very excited when it does, having those moments of clarity where you just kind of sit down and you come up with something, and then like 15 minutes later, like a whole song's done. You're like, oh, okay, cool, done.
Like 10-minute song, perhaps.
yeah, exactly. And 10 of that was like playing it. So for this was one that came together pretty quickly, and I think it was just because I wanted it to be simple. I wanted the song in a sense to be simple. I mean, it's essentially two chords going back and forth. It's just G and C major. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to try to draw out as much excitement from simplicity as possible, because when I'm thinking about what joy is, sometimes you can just get really bogged down on like, what does it mean to be joyful? How do you achieve joy? How can you what does it mean to lack joy? And I think the answer is more simple than that. And so that was sort of a reflection on that thought process of how can I take something very simple and just amplify it to a point of feeling that type of level of unfiltered bliss with it. So I think I think that opening line is kind of reflective of where I was at prior to writing the album, and the following line is kind of more of a reflection of where I was at the time. So
how interesting. So the process of creating the album, there is a lived experience in the creation of Unforgettable Cheer.
yeah,
Because we create Unforgettable Cheer. It gets quite meta now, insofar as the creation of the record Unforgettable Cheer leads the deepening.
There's so much kind of conversation built in. So I think it fights that idea of someone kind of selfishly pursuing joy, because there's so much conversation. There's a lived experience of many conversations that's built into Drew's kind of creation of the piece. But then in all of the parts that he writes for myself, for Ben, for Patrick, for Graydon, conversation is always implied. And so the parts kind of come together in a way where, I mean, it's, I guess, always true that you need all of the parts, but they're so interdependent upon one another, and they respond to each other all in unique ways. And so I think the fact that this album celebrates joy, but is kind of built upon necessary interactions, kind of forces that idea, or reminds us again that kind of we need each other. We're kind of interdependent upon one another, and to an extent we can depend on each other for our cheer, for our joy. And so we have to kind of fill into each other, give to each other in order to kind of create that beautiful balance.
It's like, because I think that, you know, independent joy and cheer is something that's essentially like self-happiness and being able to, like, you know, be independent and create your own joy. But isn't the best type the selfless kind, where you're able to like give it to someone else and share it with someone, and vice versa? And I think that's,
and then have it
and then
return,
or just one way. No. More please. No.
Have the experience of participating in a broader joyful tapestry.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I think a thought that came to mind when we were just saying that is, we had a few opportunities where we could have potentially done a show last summer. We did, like, me and Patrick did that live stream.
Yeah, we've done
once.
a few.
We did like a couple live streams, but there was like a possibility that we could do a live thing. I was just, I think our shows are just too, like, I should word it differently, but I should say that our shows are just very community based, in the sense that we have the two other members who we haven't mentioned are Joni Griffith and Kim Schneider. And these two are more of our performance artists who join us on stage. And so, like, we usually get together and just say, like, we want to just have like all these different props. You are free to do whatever you want with them. So, like, we have like random examples of, I think the first time we had them perform, we had like this big backyard show at my place 2 summers ago. And I just kind of like opened up my garage that just had a lot of random storage things in there. It's like, you guys can just like take whatever you want and use it as props. And they're just like, they're like hula hoops. So what, they brought out like a giant globe and just like, we're like spinning it. We had like 50 sparklers from Axeman that like I just like got for free. And it was like, so it was just like, okay, yeah, there we go, perfect. So a lot of the shows, they're meant to just like take every individual and just like, we are one unit, which I think is why people accuse us of being a cult, jokingly, but but like, it is like really combining people into like this one shared experience, and that just wouldn't really have been possible last summer. So I'm all for waiting. You know, I'm all for waiting till the right moment.
Yeah, this really fits with what you were saying about how interactive the band is, the decision not to play those summer shows because of the significance of the interaction with like a large crowd, the kind of inclusiveness, really. And that puts a whole other kind of spin on Nothing Beats the Serenity of When the Feeling Comes Back to Me, the way in which you're speaking with enjoyment about the live performance.
That's a great analysis right there. Absolutely.
Also, as we were reflecting, or as Elizabeth, as you were using the language of conversation to describe the co-creative songwriting process, that made me realize that the band itself is kind of dramatizing the other end of the spectrum to one-worded answers. One-worded answers, they crush me with shame, can't take blame. Then you come back with playfulness that rocks me to my core. That's in Infinity again.
Yeah.
Getting a conversation going, keeping a conversation going. There's a kind of improv ethos, I feel.
Absolutely. I mean, again, the three other guys in the band, Ben, Patrick, and Graydon, are all jazz performers, so of course their instinct is to have improvisational touches. And I'm actually really glad that you're mentioning Infinity, because that was the one song where I was kind of like, this is the sore thumb of the album, and I still really love it. I think it's a very fun, adventurous song, and it's kind of a little bit, not entirely, but it's sort of a similar direction with a lot of the newer songs that I've been coming up with the last couple months. Infinity, what's really exciting about it is because it has all these different movements, there's nothing that really repeats from it. I mean, there's sort of a section that it kind of goes like A, B, C, D, A, B, C, and then it kind of keeps changing from there. It's kind of like in a conversation where you're just like kind of running out of things to say, and you're just like, I have to ask the next question, you have to like, you feel like you're exhausting yourself just trying to come up with a question until you're like, like, what size shoe are you? Like something just completely like pointless to be asking, but just for the sake of having a conversation. What I think the ending sort of resolves around is, and it doesn't necessarily do this musically, but in terms of the feeling it gives off, is kind of going back to something that someone said earlier and kind of asking them to develop it a little bit more, which then can flourish into a much more positive, different, more engaging conversation. And this track does lead into the final song, Palace of Good Karma, which is our the first single re-release from the album. And I think that song is just very energetic, very flowing, very I don't know, there's like a cute charisma to it in a way. And so I think that that's kind of the idea of it, is that there's no need to force anything, naturally rely on what you know, and good things will happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah, letting the seemingly fragmented, disparate state of affairs that one experiences in Infinity, kind of letting that be. There's a sense of this too shall pass.
Yeah.
And showing up still with this kind of yes and ethos. The way in which you were talking about how that kind of transitions into the final track, Palace of Good Karma, that makes complete sense to me. And how fun just the opening of that song is, with the whoa and the clapping. And then immediately we have melody bridges the gap. And I think that is key as we have this transition from the one song to the other, back to the power of music again as a medium.
Yeah.
It's actually, this is something that came up in the conversation with our friend Andrew Frederick.
I think I saw a clip of that online.
Yeah, music being, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase that Andrew used. It kind of bridges a gap between us. It's a way of connecting. And for me, that made me think about how I was reading a book about the brain and music, and how so many different brain regions, and almost all brain regions, are kind of called into play in response to music. So we're doing some kind of lyrical analysis at the moment, following some, recurring philosophical questions and so on. So obviously that's like the intellectual play. But then very obviously there is, rhythm is related to the reptilian brain. We're moving, and that's something that we've been highlighting. And then the emotions, of course, are very much joy, but not just joy, because then it would be kind of artificial, but joy and basically all of the other emotions and feelings that it's recognized a part of that package. If we want to have the joy, it comes as part of a package, and all of that is invited by this music. Do you have any thoughts on either melody bridges the gap, and or all beauty instills a will to set us free? This recognition of the power of music, or the power of beauty, even more broadly, to liberate us.
Absolutely. I think that this type of like genuine, like true, beautiful care that we can provide to another is what essentially, releases the shackles, the proverbial shackles of our societies. And so that's kind of my idea with that lyric is taking care of one another.